We're now live.
Okay, then I will welcome all who are here to the Board Finance Committee of the East Bay Regional Park District, our meeting for Wednesday, June 24th. And with that, I'll ask for a roll call and maybe an introduction of management.
This is Allie Haynes, Committee Secretary, taking roll. Director and Chair Coffey.
Here.
Director Ellen Corbett.
Here.
Director Dee Rosario.
Here.
We also have Deputy General Manager Dr. Ana M. Alvarez on the call. Assistant General Manager Deborah Ocker. Assistant General Manager Jim O'Connor. And I believe that's all for the executive staff.
All righty, then Deborah, would you describe the meeting?
Yes, thank you, Director Coffey. Today's Board Finance Committee meeting is held in accordance with Governor Newsom's executive order allowing board members to participate in standing committee meetings remotely. We are providing a live video streaming, which is posted on the agenda for a YouTube link for the public to watch the meeting. We also are providing the public the opportunity to join the Zoom meeting if they'd like to make a public comment on any items on the agenda or in the public comment section of the agenda at the end. This information can all be found on the district's website. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Okay, I think the committee is fine and understands the process of the meeting. So we'll go directly to item number 1. That's the 2019 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report with the participation of our audit firm.
Great. I will have, we'll have Michelle Strawson O'Hara, our Assistant Finance Officer, introduce this item, and we will have our auditors do a presentation as well.
Thank you, Deborah. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle Strawson O'Hara, Assistant Finance Officer. Today, we are pleased to present our 2019 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. I'd like to start off by recognizing the team that contributed to preparing this document, in particular, Accounting Manager Kim Belingett, who worked very closely with the auditors and had a significant role in putting this together over the past several months. Also, Audit Manager David Sumner, who prepared the statistical section, and Confidential Secretary Connie Swisher, who handled document management and putting together the final published document. Plus, there were many other staff throughout the district who contributed to the timely completion of the CAFR. After my presentation, we have audit partners Ashley Casey and Rosalva Flores from Brown Armstrong Accountancy Corporation presenting today and addressing any other questions you may have. Due to the timing of the committee meetings this year, we presented the CAFR to the Park Advisory Committee this past Monday before presenting to you. And then we'll be bringing this to the full board on June 7th for acceptance. We also had our annual exit conference with the audit team, the general manager and deputy general manager to discuss the overall audit process and the outcomes on June 3rd. As a reminder of the district's audit cycle, the intern audit kicked off in January with Brown Armstrong on site for 1 week, conducting interviews and preliminary testing and reviewing internal controls and compliance. They intended to return again at the beginning of May for final field work. However, due to the COVID pandemic, all final fieldwork testing was completed remotely this year, which was a first for us. The testing and CAFR preparation continued through mid-June when we were able to finalize the reports. So first off, we'd like to walk through the CAFR in the PowerPoint and highlight what we believe are some key points. The CAFR is broken down into 3 sections: the introductory, financial, and statistical sections. The introductory section includes a transmittal letter and the Financial Reporting Award from the Government Finance Officers Association, The districts received this award for the past 19 consecutive years and will again submit for the award application for 2019. After the introductory section, the financial section starts with the independent auditor's report, which includes a clean or unmodified audit opinion. Then follows the management's discussion and analysis, which is a useful narrative of the numbers, the basic financial statements, the notes to financial statements, the required supplementary and supplementary information sections, and lastly, the statistical section. This first financial statement is the government-wide picture, which is adjusted for full accrual. And this statement of net position can be found on page 31 of your CAFR. So the government-wide picture, again, it's adjusted for full accrual, and which means it takes on a broader and longer-term view of the financials. The government-wide, for example, includes capital assets and long-term liabilities, such as the pension liabilities, which are not included in the governmental fund financial statements, which follow. After the fund financials are the proprietary funds, which account for the district's internal service funds, including workers' compensation, major infrastructure renovation and replacement, major equipment replacement, general liability, etc. And next are the fiduciary funds financial statements, which account for the district's pension plans held in trust. And then the notes to the financial statements include important details to the basic financial statements. Following the notes are the required supplementary and supplementary information sections, and include budgetary information, pension and retiree medical funding, as well as additional details on the non-major governmental funds. And then lastly is the statistical section, which provides interesting trends and a comparison of data over the past 10 years. This slide that's up now shows the total increase in net position to $847.5 million, which is made primarily up of net investments in capital assets as the district continues to invest in land acquisitions and development. You can see how the increases in assets, the blue line is relatively consistent with the total net position, the green line. This next slide is a summary of the governmental funds, and that can be found on page 34, and 35 of the CAFR. The governmental funds include the general fund, the debt service fund, project fund, and other non-major funds. The district's governmental funds have a combined fund balance of $303.7 million and a reduction of $5.6 million from 2018 due to spending down of capital bond proceeds for projects. Governmental accounting classifies these fund balances in a hierarchy, breaking down the fund balance into what's available to spend and what is not. At the top are the non-spendable balances such as inventory and prepaid expenses. The next section is restricted by external parties, legal requirements, or contracts. The next one is the committed balances, and these are where the board has passed a resolution to set aside money for special circumstances, and these funds can only be used in compliance with that resolution. Assigned are funds that are set aside for a specific purpose, such as election costs or legal contingencies. And then the unassigned fund balance is what's left over for future spending. This next slide is a summary of the governmental funds, revenue and expenditures. And the most significant changes from 2018 were an increase in the property tax revenues and assessments, and increases in expenses for debt service payments and capital outlay. Next, we'll drill down on the details of the general fund, which is the district's operating fund. And this schedule can also be found in the CAFR on page 99. And this shows the original approved budget for 2019, the final budget, and the actual amounts. The final budget includes adjustments during the year for appropriations and transfers from the mid-year budget review, for example, to fund projects, internal service funds, pay down unfunded liabilities. And then in the actual column, the net change in fund balance was 16.5 million for the year, which was attributed to higher than projected property tax revenues, as well as personnel and operating expenditures below budget. The next couple of slides look at our pension plans. The district's OPEB, or retiree medical, and pension liabilities, which includes CalPERS and our district plan, amounted to $137 million as of December 31st, 2019, which was a decrease of about $12 million over the prior year. To help mitigate the district's growing retiree obligations, the district established a irrevocable Section 115 pension trust in 2017 and has set aside $7.4 million for funding anticipated increased costs of the CalPERS miscellaneous plan. When we look at the funding progress, the pension funding, the district is funded at a range of 72% for the CalPERS miscellaneous plan to a high of 88% for the district's general employees retirement plan. Overall, these funds are considered well-funded in comparison to other agencies, but it's good to remember that these rates do fluctuate based not only on the contributions, but changes in investment returns and pension assumptions. In addition to the CAFR, staff is requesting recommendation from the committee to bring the auditor's communication with those charged with governance, the 2020 appropriations or GAN limit letter, and the single audit report to the board for acceptance. That concludes my presentation. Before I invite Ashley Casey and Rosalva Flores from Brown Armstrong to speak, does anyone have any questions for me? Director Coffey, I think you're muted.
Sorry. Okay, Dee or Ellen, any questions? I see head shaking, so we can move directly to the auditor's presentation.
Okay.
Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome.
Thank you and good afternoon. I am the engagement partner responsible for all accounting and auditing services to your district. I will be presenting the results of our audit for the December 31, 2019 financial statements. And Ashley Casey, who was the acting engagement manager, will also be presenting with me. You'll see our presentation materials. We are very happy to provide you with results of our audit, and we look forward to answering any questions that you may have. So I kind of want to just start with having Ashley kick off our meeting with just giving you a quick recap of our scope of services, and then she'll also just give you a brief summary of our audit timeline.
Thank you, Rosalva. So just a summary of our scope of services. We did present on February 26th to the committee about our scope of services. And we are performing these duties on behalf of you guys. You guys have engaged us. This is our first year auditing the district. And so we'll be giving our opinion today on the audited financial statements in compliance with government auditing standards and generally accepted auditing standards. Other communications that we'll be going over is the required communication with the board that's commonly referred to as the SAS 114 letter, as well as our report on internal controls over financial reporting and compliance in compliance with government auditing standards, and a report on compliance for the single audit. And kind of as Michelle already mentioned, she kind of went over the audit timeline. And so I just presented, I had a list here that we had on the audit timeline. And as noted, we performed our interim field work, and that was a lot more of our controls and understanding testing. And then at our final field work, that was offsite. That's where we performed a lot of our substantiating all of the account balances and reviewing confirmations that were received and the CAFR that was prepared. But I'll turn it back over to Rosalba for the results of the audit.
Thank you, Ashley. And so earlier, Ashley just kind of mentioned, and she stated the objectives of the audit, which is the reason why you engaged us. And obviously at the conclusion of our audit, you want to hear the results of our audit. And I want to kind of start with stating that we had a very successful audit. There were some extraordinary things, including, as Ashley mentioned, first year, as auditors, and then we came on and performed interim at your offices, but because of the pandemic, we perform our final procedures remotely. Despite that, we felt there was a successful audit. There was no delays throughout that process. Our opinions were completed timely. So the first report that I want to go over is the required communication, which Ashley briefly mentioned as well. This communication does provide you with significant information as it relates to the audit. And obviously, because we're mostly communicating with your management as we are conducting our audit, we don't necessarily get to talk to you very much. And so professional standards do require that we provide you in written format important matters as they relate to the audit. So, as every year there's sometimes new accounting standards that are required to be implemented. We will assist management if needed with regards to implementing these standards. This year there was actually a new standard issue, GASB statement number 95, that actually delayed implementation of all standards that were effective, delayed them by 1 year because of the pandemic, which would provide everyone with about one additional year to implement because of the pandemic. However, the district did actually move forward with implementing several standards. And so I want to emphasize that, that's given the situation, it's additional effort to, besides everything else, coordinating an audit remotely, having to address implementation of new standards. So, I commend the district for moving forward and still implementing standards that, could have been delayed by 1 year. So there's a few of them that I wanted to mention. Statement number 83 on certain asset retirement obligations, that really didn't have an impact on the financial statements, as well as GASB statement number 84 on fiduciary activities. Statement number 88, which is on debt disclosures, didn't have a significant impact either, but it did require some additional disclosures in your financial statements, and those are included in the CAFR. And then also, as we're doing our procedures, we're always taking a look at significant estimates. Obviously, there's a lot of estimation in your financial statements related to different accounts. The most significant that we found were, for instance, fair value of investments. Those are derived by various methods, and we're always taking a look to make sure that they are reasonable and that we understand how that estimation was derived. And then also there's significant estimation around the capital assets lives and then depreciation expense. So as we're conducting our audit and performing procedures, we're also taking a look at those estimates to make sure they're reasonable. And then another big one that requires significant estimation is surrounding your actuarial estimates on your defined benefit plans and your medical benefits. And so for that, we're taking a look at the valuation reports from the actuary, making sure that we have a good understanding and that we believe the estimates are reasonable. And we did, in fact, find that those estimates were reasonable. And then the risk management liabilities also carry estimations. So we also took a look at that, determined how management arrived with those and if they were reasonable. And then as part of the audit as well, sometimes we may identify some adjustments to the financial statements. They may be considered significant or trivial. There was one adjustment that was corrected by management. It did not affect the general fund fund balance, and management corrected it right away, and we reflected that that was reflected in the financial statements. And then the last item in regards to disagreement with management, sometimes as we're conducting the audit, we might find that, we disagree with an accounting treatment. We did not have any disagreements with management. I think we worked very well. And again, given that, first year is a unique year, and given the current situation, I was very pleased that we did not have any disagreements with management. Any questions on that slide before I go on to going over the reports? Okay, so on your screen is our next report, which is the first one is and that I want to cover is the main opinion on your financial statements. After we perform all of our procedures and given all the documentation that we received, we were very satisfied with the information. And so we were able to conclude that the financial statements were materially accurate. So we have provided you with a modified opinion, and that is the highest form of opinion that you can receive. It's a clean opinion. Congratulations, by the way. Any questions so far? Okay, so moving on to the next report. As we're doing our procedures and getting an understanding of your controls, we're also taking a look to make sure that controls are good, that there's adequate segregation of duties, that there's no significant deficiencies, material weaknesses, and that your district is compliant with laws and regulations. So as we were conducting our audit, I'm pleased to report that we did not identify any instances in which your district did not comply with laws and regulations. And I'm also happy to report that there were no material weaknesses. So the only item on this report was one significant deficiency identified, and that related to the audit adjustment that I briefly spoke about in the previous slide. And again, that did not have an impact on the general funds fund balance. Questions so far? Okay. And then the next report is the report on the compliance with each major program. As you know, your district receives federal funds, and you utilize those funds for various projects. And as part of our audit, we take a look and identify what's called major programs. And so we test major programs to ensure that these expenditures are being spent on the purpose of the grant. And so we performed our procedures for the major programs. We selected sample, and we found that all of our testing performed in regards to these federal programs complied with the guidelines. And so in our reports, we found there were no material weaknesses with regards to the federal programs and no significant deficiencies. Within the single audit report, there is a required schedule. It's referred to as a schedule of findings and question costs. And that schedule also requires a summary of any findings related on the financial statement side. So that report does include the significant deficiency that I just spoke about related to the property tax revenue. Questions so far? Okay. And then on the next slide, I wanted to mention that we, as we were performing our audit, we had a couple of observations that we thought would be a good recommendation for the district to consider. As we were conducting our exit meeting with management and meeting with general management, we did go over these in detail, and they were very supportive of all of them. And two of them related to the financial statements, and then the other three related to the information technology, the general controls. And the ones on the information technology general controls is because we took a pretty good deep dive into looking at the procedures in place. And so all of these right here, again, they're just, best practices to consider. And we had a good long discussion with management, and they were very supportive of the recommendations. And so we didn't have any concerns. Again, this is nothing that would impact your internal controls. They're just, opportunities for improvement. And the first two related up to the financial statement side, they related to your defined benefit plans and your medical benefits. And again, these are recommendations that we found. Again, management was very supportive, and we were very pleased with the response. And we'll kind of sort of follow up next year on these, but I just wanted to bring those to your attention. And if you would like me to go over each of them in detail, I'd be pleased to.
I would actually like to hear you break those out.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
So the first one on the other post-employment benefits, the district does offer cash subsidies for these participants. And these cash subsidies, they aren't really validated. There's no documentation validating that these subsidies are actually specifically used for these medical benefits. So when we were performing our procedures, we noted that it would be a good practice to document the process to ensure that these subsidies are in fact being restricted for the payment of these medical benefits. And so we also thought that it might be a good idea for management to also maybe consider testing a sample and validating these and documenting that.
Great.
Any question?
Thank you. That's
okay. And then on the next one related to your defined benefit plans and also OPIB in accordance with statements number 68 and 75. As you know, your management does look out to third-party service providers to assist with determining these valuations, and also with coming up with calculations on the required disclosures in accordance with statement number 68 and 75. And so because there's a lot of estimations that go into these valuations, there's a lot of assumptions made. We thought that it would be a good recommendation just to reinforce to management to be looking at these valuation reports, taking a look at the assumptions, making sure that they're reasonable. And then also these calculations, we recommend that they be reviewed in detail, and as well as disclosures. Questions so far? Okay, and then like I said, the other three related to information technology. The first one is that we just noted is as we were performing our general controls, the employee certification and awareness of IT policies, there really isn't a requirement to have employees sign. And so we thought a good business practice would be to require them to sign, just kind of validating that they're aware of them and they understand these IT policies and procedures. And then the other two, again, looking at our best practices, we noted there isn't a formal policy requiring passwords. And so we thought if the district could kind of implement more of a formal policy just to provide staff more with guidance on the best practice, if you will. And then on the last one, we noted as we were looking at system users, there isn't a process to periodically review this list. And we just want to make sure that there might potentially not be any employees that have unauthorized access that shouldn't have to your system. So we thought that was something that management could also consider implementing.
Thank you. I know you did that in the closed session, but I wanted to hear it again. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I have a question. I do have a question
Sure.
or comment.
Let's go with Ellen first then.
Okay. Thank you very much, Colin. With regard to the information technology policies, I appreciate these recommendations. These are very important to make sure we continue to keep our data and information secure and less hack-free. So appreciate that. And then I think the other two suggestions are quite good ones as well with regard to retirement issues. So I have a very specific question with regard to these, and I perhaps should direct this towards Deborah, I'm guessing. So these are great recommendations by our auditors. Do we just assume they will be implemented? Does it take board action to request that these suggestions be implemented? How does that work?
Thank you for that question, Director Corbett. I did want to respond to these recommendations, and we're very, we're appreciative of all the work that the auditors did. They had a great team out there, and they did make some great recommendations. There is no board action that's required for us to implement these. I think as a normal part of auditing, they do go back the following year and follow up on their prior year recommendations. And so if you want to ask the auditors to report back to you on whether we implemented them, that can be part of their report out, but we will certainly be addressing them. Some of the IT policy recommendations are things that we do have implemented, but sometimes we're doing things through email or through system alerts rather than having a formal policy. So we're happy to write it up in a more formalized policy to document what our procedures actually are. And, those first two comments are very technical. And so we do appreciate that this audit team is so well-versed and educated on all these technical GASB rules that they can, give us good detailed information. So there's no board action required for us to follow up on these. We will, as management, be following up on these.
Okay, very good. And then you'll report back to us what's happening with them?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you so much.
Dee, anything further?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm good. I wanted to mention, as Dee alluded to, an ad hoc committee of the board of directors was able to meet privately with the auditors in the absence of management, in order to ask them maybe slightly more sensitive issues than we'd want to address publicly, or that generally just to give them an opportunity to directly inform us of any particular problems or deficiencies they wanted to call out. And in particular, we went over these recommendations and the satisfaction the auditors had with internal controls that are in place within the district's operations. So we appreciate all that. Deborah Ocker, anything in closing out the topic?
No, I have no other comments.
Do we have any public comment on this particular agenda item?
I believe we do. I'm not positive that the auditors finished their complete presentation. They might have one more slide, and then I do believe we have one public comment.
All right, let's go there. I'm sorry, I thought we'd reached that. Thank you.
That's okay. And thank you, Deborah. Ashley's just going to finish it off. Michelle did a fantastic job in going over the financial statements. So we just really wanted to just kind of brief you regarding our review process. So go ahead, Ashley.
Thank you. In regards to our financial statement review process, I just wanted to highlight, we do have an administrative review process where we have someone with the English degree that actually reads through the entire document and provides those recommendations to management on a perspective of consistency and grammar and whatnot. But we also perform an engagement team review that is resolved by myself and our senior. We'll review the CAFR in its entirety, ensuring that it does meet all the requirements for GOA, as well as disclosure checklist requirements in regards to government accounting standards. But we also have a quality control review. So that's a partner within our firm who does an independent review of our audit work papers, as well as the CAFR, to ensure that our audit is done in compliance with standards. It's not specifically a requirement of the standards for us to do that, but we do that to ensure the efficiencies of our audit and completion of our audits. But we do have an outside party that outside organization that does a review of all of our audits as well every 3 years. But in regards to our firm, we have a separate audit partner who does review the engagement from looking at it as not being involved in management of the audit. Other than that, we do have where the auditor and management will do the submission for the Federal Audit Clearinghouse. So that has been submitted. And then as Michelle mentioned, you guys are going through your process, and then the CAFR will be submitted to GOA. But that completes our presentation.
Ashley, and I just wanted to kind of mention, since Ashley talked about the GFOA award, there's a tremendous effort that goes into the CAFR. And, you know, we got the first version of the CAFR, and it was a really well-written document. That's not the case sometimes, but I wanted to make sure and make you aware that, you know, we received a very good document. You know, it was easy to review. It was coherent. But I mainly wanted to emphasize also that, you know, there's a lot of work that goes into it, you know, before it gets submitted to the GFOA. So I wanted to commend your, you know, entire team, and also take the time, you know, once again to commend them on, you know, and thank them for all their assistance throughout the audit. Again, you know, very challenging year, you know, where all of a sudden, you know, we came onto your offices, did our audit, we documented our procedures and understanding of your controls. And then all of a sudden, you know, we're kind of forced to finish off our audit remotely. And, you know, that requires a lot of effort to, you know, provide us with the information, but, you know, everything was provided to us timely. And, you know, that's the reason we're able to be here and present to you the final document. So I want to take the time to thank Deborah, Michelle, Kim, and the entire staff for all their help throughout the audit.
Well, we certainly appreciate your work and the quality of this presentation and the reports we've received. They've all helped us understand what you have done very well, and it's very much appreciated. Do we want to turn to our public comment at this point?
Sure, we'll have
that.
Allie introduce that. If you want to bring the presentation down, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, we have Kelly who would like to make a public comment about the CAFR, the agenda item number 1.
Hello.
Hi, Kelly.
Go ahead, Kelly.
The stated objectives of these reports are sustainable finances, transparency, and long-term planning. Budgets are based on assumptions about future events. Forecasts for property taxes are sensitive and they're prone to significant error. Last year, the actual property taxes came in 3% above the budget forecast. Revenues have grown 6% per year over the last 9 years. A 3% variance from budget is normal, but it's significant. Right now, the district is facing a disruption. The National Bureau of Economic Research has announced a recession. This mid-year budget adjustment is an opportunity to change course, to steer clear of the worst storms, to batten down the hatches. It's an opportunity that's being wasted. This budget forecasts that property taxes will grow strongly for 5 more years, nearly 5% per year. Many cities in the Bay Area project weaker growth of 1 to 4% per year. The budget forecast raises a red flag, and the current pandemic 5% growth appears overly optimistic. There's a joke from a movie. Thelma and Louise are pedal to the metal, driving towards a cliff. Passenger asks, why don't you put on the brakes? The driver answers, we don't have a precise accounting estimate for the topographical depth of this canyon. We're asking this committee to ensure the forecast is prudent and conservative, not out of line with other jurisdictions. The course adjustment can't wait for next year. Thank you.
Okay, that's actually our next agenda topic, but isn't all that untimely given that we're just going to move into that. Any closing remarks from management before we go on to the motion? No? So do I hear a motion that this committee refer the audit report to the full board for acceptance?
So moved. And I would also like to thank the auditors for their fine work as well.
Second by Dee. Roll call.
Allie Haynes, Committee Secretary, taking a roll call vote. Director Corbett,
Yes.
Director Rosario,
Aye.
Director Coffey.
Aye. And, just in closing, I've said before, if it wasn't for the fact that the environment we're surrounded by is so depressing and uncertain, we'd all be jumping up and down in our seats at how financially sound this organization is and how obviously well managed it is. And in particular, Deborah, I want to compliment your whole team in this process. So thank you much. With that, let's.
Thank you.
Dee, yes. With that, let's move on to item 2, 2020 mid-year budget report and proposed budget adjustments. Deb Spalding.
Good afternoon. I'm Deb Spalding, Assistant Finance Officer. I'm gonna share my screen here.
And if I
Deborah,
may,
yeah, Deborah, before you get started, we're gonna have Anna have some introductory remarks for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
thank you, Director Coffey. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a beautiful day to contribute to the mission of the East Bay Regional Park District. Deputy General Manager, Dr. Ana Alvarez, instead of General Manager Doyle. And I appreciate the commentary on getting us to this item because while many local governments are facing immediate budget shortfalls, the Park District is well poised today to take actions that can best speak to the board's priorities and interest in these uncertain times. The mid-year budget is a combination of many voices and collaboration by all department heads and the Park District's executive team. I am very pleased to partner with AGM Deborah Acker and her team in formulating our best recommendation to the Board Finance Committee. And you will learn from today's presentation that the proposed mid-year adjustments respond to the immediate COVID-19 impacts, while at the same time, it is a forward-looking budget that better prepares the Park District for the imminent economic uncertainty by considering a couple of things. One is the unfunded liabilities in benefit of our employees, first and foremost, through a pension liability contribution in the form of a pay down of $1 million. Also considering unfunded liabilities in benefit of the environment through an allocation of another $1 million for environmental remediation. And last and certainly not least, considering our public commitments through the first allocation in support of implementing Measure FF projects and replenishment of the hazardous tree removal program with a $500,000 allocation, which also speaks to our public commitment of a healthy and safety forest. A key highlight is our recommendation for a set aside to create a smoothing fund to help mitigate anticipated budgetary impacts in the near future from the imminent economic recession. This is something that the district has done in the past, in the last recession in 2008, and it's something that has served well most public agencies that had the opportunity and the ability to set aside a smoothing fund. Additionally, I would like to bring to the board's attention the proposed allocations that incorporate several items from the board directors' workshops, not only from 2019, but also from 2018. And it's important for me to take a moment to highlight those because it speaks to the main interest of those workshops, and it also speaks to our commitment to follow the interests and priorities of the board directors. There's a, which includes a $100,000 investment towards a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative that was discussed in 2018, 2019, and it certainly is responsive to the board's direction to staff a couple of weeks ago and its resolution denouncing racism and creating an inclusive organization where everyone can feel that they belong. There are also several pieces of equipment to support the board's direction in the resolution for the elimination of the use of glyphosate in developed park areas. You will hear from staff's presentation that we continue to address how to tweak how we do our work to ensure adherence with the spirit and the intent of that resolution. And wildfire prevention is also a fundamental area priority by the board, and staff, you will see, is recommending investment in support of Fire Station 2 through the acquisition of a generator to ensure continuity of operations during the planned power outages. While we are dealing with an unprecedented pandemic, we're all in civic unrest. We're also having to continue to plan for our ability to manage wildfires in the wild urban interface. So there are other board interests from the workshops that we carry forward as part of this mid-year budget allocation, including the allocation for the butterflies habitat, the restoration of the Araya Ranch roof, and the funding phase for the DeVal service maintenance yard improvement. And those are the things that I really wanted to pull out as part of the brief introduction so that we understand a little bit of context before we go into the details. So I would like to invite Deborah Spalding to walk us through the proposed 2020 mid-year budget adjustments, and Deborah Acker and I will be available to answer any questions after her presentation.
Thank you, that was very helpful. All right, so I will now share my screen. Give me a minute here. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes.
All right. So Anna provided a good amount of context already, but just to recap some of what she said. So before we get into the details, here's an overview of our mid-year budget process. So as Michelle and our audit team just portrayed to you, so at the close of the prior year final audit, we then have information about what our available fund balance is. And we use that available fund balance first and foremost to address our fund balance reserve requirements. After those have been met, any funds that are available are then assessed for use for one-time funding requests. So not for ongoing things like staffing, but for one-time items. And we look at park district needs and board of directors priorities in determining how to use those funds. So each division prepares its mid-year budget request based on what those priorities are. So these were the priorities that were provided to help divisions in framing their requests and what their considerations should be. So first and foremost was funding for COVID-19 response, having a reserve set aside for the long-term economic effects, replenishment of any depleted park district reserves, looking at capital projects that are already underway but that have funding shortfalls, safe and healthy forest management, infrastructure renovation and replacement fund, that's our MER fund, addressing pension liabilities and stabilizing our future pension costs, environmental remediation and restoration, repairing damaged trails, parklands, and facilities, and then lastly, but not least, mitigation and adaptations related to the changing climate. This slide just summarizes all of the funding sources that were used during the mid-year. So we used almost $14 million in general fund reserves. $1.1 million from the MER fund. That's for major infrastructure renovation and replacement. This was the first year that our Measure FF fund is available and will be assessed on people's property taxes. So $1 million is appropriated from Measure FF, $200,000 from our East Contra Costa County LLD, and $100,000 from one of our zones of benefit at Walpert Ridge, and then a small amount from our 2 County Trails LLD. And now, rather than going through all of the appropriations that were made at mid-year, those are all listed in the report. Instead, we've grouped the different appropriations sort of according to what they were addressing. So this first slide is showing fund balance replenishment and addressing long-term liabilities. So we made a $5 million, we're recommending a $5 million contribution to fully fund our annual obligation for our MER fund. You may recall last year we established a MER policy, and in that we said we were going to attempt to fund it to its full extent required, which is $10 million per year. So this $5 million appropriation would get us to that $10 million when you add it to the amount that was contributed during the original adopted budget. Next is the $1 million for pension liability contribution paydown. Another $1 million for addressing environmental remediation needs, and that's can be used in several areas. The next item, $2 million for aquatic facility and water resources needs. Again, we have several projects that will be needing these funds in the future, so it's to be used in several areas as those needs arise. And then last on this list is $500,000 for hazardous tree funding. So these are all long-term liabilities that we know are going to be funds that will be required in the future. So we're trying to set ourselves up for the future to be prepared for what might be coming. Next, we've grouped together all of the funds that we are contributing for COVID-19 emergency response and just listing out some of how those funds are going to be used. So acquisition of hardware and software to continue staff working remotely, continuing to replenish PPE supplies, acquiring smartphones for operations staff who are now having to do more of their work out in the field, touchless hand dryers at Quarry Lakes, that's in the restrooms for patrons to use, park signage and message boards and PSAs and other public communications has been a really big area of response for the Park District. And then last on this list is $100,000 for picnic area alterations, again, to provide the necessary spacing to keep our patrons safe. This slide is talking about funding for current projects that are underway but that have funding needs. At the Pinole Shores Bridge, there's a handrail repair that's necessary. The Tilden Nature Area pond dredging is a project that's been underway and is now reaching the next phase, so funding is needed for that. The Radke Martinez Shoreline Park, a turf restoration, that would be an environmental project helping with water conservation. $770,000 for Eagle 8 purchase. The $500,000 for hazardous tree funding. And lastly, parking security at the Lake Chabot headquarter offices. Continuing on, these are other high priority projects and programs. $100,000 for diversity, equity, inclusion training, DEI training, and that will go into the human resources budget. $500,000 for land acquisition funds, and those funds would be used in areas where there is no measured WW match. So that's in the Livermore area. $150,000 for a generator for the Trudeau Training Center. $75,000 for fire department radio replacement, and that's for that eBrick system, and $100,000 for the 911 dispatch system upgrade. So all of the previous slides were talking about general fund appropriations. Now we're getting into appropriations from other funding sources. So this first list is from our MER fund. We are funding the Hayward Shoreline Pier repair, $500,000 for the vault to sewer project, which is ongoing and providing restrooms in various areas. $330,000 for the Arada barn roof repair, and $130,000 for the Del Val service yard, and this is the third phase of that project. Next is our East Contra Costa County LLD, $150,000 for grazing infrastructure, and $50,000 for East County fence repair. As mentioned earlier, this is the first year that Measure FF funds will be available. And so we're beginning to address the projects that were listed out as being our highest priority. So $500,000 for the Crown upgrade stormwater drainage project, $250,000 to develop and maintain the San Francisco Bay Trail, another $150,000 for the Bay Trail at Point Malati, $100,000 for the Temescal erosion and watershed project, and $130,000 for the Del Val service yard, phase 3. Actually, I believe that should not be listed there, excuse me. And then lastly, Walpert Ridge Zone of Benefit, $100,000 for the replacing the Meineke septic system. So that concludes our reports, and we'll be requesting recommendations, but I will stop sharing my screen right now and allow for any questions.
Deborah Ocker, you want to add?
Thank you. I would like to, Director Coffey. I just wanted to say that Deborah did a great high-level presentation. Some of the items that Director Alvarez, Dr. Alvarez mentioned are in the report, but they just weren't highlighted. They're a little bit of the lower dollar amounts, like the butterfly garden and the fire station generator. I also just wanted to mention that our speaker had talked about property tax revenues. And, you know, certainly property tax revenues and all revenues for the Park District are going to be very challenging to project. Things are quickly changing, and the district is, you know, we'll be putting forth estimates for any adjustments to revenue as they come about. If we see any large, you know, things in the budget that need to be adjusted before the end of the year, we will come back to the Board of Directors. We don't have to do it in this process. We're really waiting for our August payment and our projections from the counties and from our consultants. Remember, we're covering 2 counties as our jurisdiction. And so in some small cities, they know exactly what's going on. They can look outside and see what developments are happening, what developments are stopping. And, you know, we're covering 2 counties, so we have a bit of information to gather. And so as new information comes up about interest revenue, which is up and down, about our charges for fees, right? We don't know if we're opening up our summer season yet. So we will come back to the board as necessary to make any adjustments. We're not proposing any reductions in revenue today. That's all I wanted to add.
All right, let me move to board member questions. Ellen, I see your hand.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that excellent presentation, and thanks for highlighting some of the issues that the board has raised as priorities as well. Very much appreciate that in all of the previous presentations. And also thank you for making some great recommendations for some very important areas of our mission. Appreciate that very much. I do have some sort of specific questions about some of the items. Is it okay if I go through those for additional information? So I would start with the aquatic facilities, $2 million funding amount. Oh, and before I go there, I also appreciate your comments, AGM Ocker. I was going to ask and highlight that we do have the opportunity to make adjustments as we go along based on what we learned this year, because this is a very extraordinary time and we don't have a crystal ball. So thank you so much for highlighting that we will make smart choices as we go along. Thank you. So with regard to the aquatic facilities, does that include Roberts and or Concha Loma?
Do you want me to take this, Deborah? I'll maybe start it and you can jump in if I miss it. So the funds, yes, they would be available for either of those projects. And there are also others that we know are on the horizon. You know, we have this benefit of available fund balance now, and we know we have a lot of needs in the future. So it's Roberts, Crown Beach, several other areas. So we just want to set the funds aside and then they'll be there when we need them.
Thank you very much. We know those are extremely important. And with regard to the environmental remediation, is there somewhere you can direct me to determine sort of what the definition of that is, so I can anticipate what sorts of projects might be funded out of that fund?
Yes, Director Corbett, even in our prior item, our annual financial report, we're reporting our liability for the Anthony Chabot marksmanship range. So the closing of the gun club, we are still setting money aside for the remediation out there. And then from time to time, other hotspots, you know, present themselves. And so these funds would be available for that as well.
Okay, and thank you very much. That helps. And I just want to, this is just a comment, it's not a question. I would very much hope when we're looking at issues of environmental remediation and the ongoing issues we've had at Lake Temescal, that we find some pathway to ensure that those that are contributing to the environmental issues can help pay their fair share. I just think that's extremely important. And I know Director Rosario is working on that as well. So that's just my comment on that. With regard to, can someone refresh my memory with regard to the helicopters? I see the $707,000 of additional funds for purchase. Are we in the process of purchasing the additional helicopter at this point and have found that we need additional funds, or what is the, enlighten me on that one?
Yes, Director Corbett, Deputy General Manager, Dr. Ana Alvarez. The district has a very good conservative practice of setting aside funds for the replacement of large assets, such as the acquisition of or the replacement of a helicopter. So this will be an additional allocation towards that fund. And we are in the process and trying to finalize a recommendation for the replacement of the helicopter this year. So it's something that will be brought forward to the board relatively soon.
And this would be the replacement of what we have, or an additional, so we're at 2, or we would be at 1, or?
So we currently have 2 helicopters as part of the public safety operation. And this will be a replacement to one of the helicopters, so it'll be a total of 2. And I also see that we have our AGM Shaburo. If he would like to add anything else to the answer, that would be great.
Yes, that would be fine. I did get my answer, but if Chief would like to say something, that's great.
Thank you, Madam President. Well done, Director Alvarez, or excuse me, Deputy General Manager Alvarez. You summed it up correctly. We are in the process of identifying that helicopter and preparing for purchase.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, and then on to the next one. Happy to see that the dredging, funds for the dredging at Tilden, at the pond, are moving forward. Yay, that's great. And then on the improving the security of the parking lot at our public safety headquarters, I'm just wondering, I do know that is very much needed and great for security. Do we anticipate that the Nike classroom parking lot will be opening at some point for hikers that use the trails up that way?
Director Corbett, I will let Chief Shaburo speak to the specific design for that fence, because my answer will be based on recollection, but I certainly don't want to misguide you in any way. Tony, do you have anything to add to that?
And Deputy Director Alvarez, I think you may have there's some feedback in your audio, like you have another electronic gizmo somewhere nearby.
Thank you.
Good afternoon again, Director Anthony Chabreau at AGM of Public Safety. So that gate is, the gate at the bottom is remaining closed as part of the mitigation of patron load. And that's what we're doing overall. And that's why the gate still remains closed. And then as we moved into the current state of unrest, it is very helpful. And it's greatly appreciated by our staff at the Public Safety Headquarters that we have that gate closed at this point.
Okay, so no plans for it to be open after the security improvements.
Well, I think the long range plan is that parking lot would remain open. I can tell you that, unless I could be misspeaking there, but that has always been the intent that at some point access would again open up to that lot. It's just for those two reasons that I gave that it remains closed.
Okay, all right, thank you. Then I have a question about the two grazing type issues, the non-property cattle fencing, and under special funds, other funds, there's also an item with regard to grazing infrastructure repairs, and I believe there's grazing water infrastructure dollars. It's my understanding that the grazing revenue is used, 100% of it is used to do improvements on grazing properties. So is this funding in addition to those grazing fees?
Director Corbett, I'll start off, and then I don't know if Matt or Deb want to add to it, but the grazing revenue actually goes into the general fund. It is not set aside as a special funding source. We certainly utilize that general fund revenue to address grazing needs. The 200,000 is actually an adjustment. It was something we missed in the adopted budget, and so we're bringing it as a fix for mid-year. It wasn't a new request. And then we've identified one of the properties, the Nunn property, is that new property that we are holding an easement over, I believe, that needs additional fencing. And so that is something new to the district that we need to put that fencing in. And I think, you know, just overall, we are focusing on grazing a little bit more. We have our new grazing team, and they've had a chance to go out on the land and identify where we can make improvements. Grazing is a really important part of our fuels management program and being able to move the animals around. So we're putting funding towards that program.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. In a question I'd asked months ago, I was of the understanding that grazing fees went directly to grazing improvements. So I thank you for clarifying that. And then just a couple more. Very happy to see that we're going to be putting in water bottle filling stations. Fabulous. I just hope we make sure whatever we do a review of the, you know, all the fittings to make sure we address any issues with regard to lead or anything like that, which I'm sure we will. I also noticed that we're purchasing some new equipment so that we can continue to do our maintenance toxic free. So appreciate that very much. And I'm just wondering, do we prioritize the purchase of electric equipment at all? I know we've talked about this several times. I bring up this question all the time, whether we're looking at more environmentally sensitive equipment, either in vehicles or other, you know, maintenance equipment. And I know we have a committee that meets and discusses such issues, but are we starting to implement that, looking at those types of equipment more specifically when we make these purchases?
So let me try can you hear me better? Does it sound better?
Yes, that's much
Great.
better. Perfect.
Zoom updated its settings in my computer, but anyways. So I think I would certainly like to have Jim O'Connor speak to the item, but it's important to note that also that staff is very responsive to the board's resolution that prioritizes anything that we do to be climate friendly and not contribute to our carbon footprint as we're trying to manage and operationalize the services of public parklands to the public. So I know that operations also through the Green Fleet Management Plan has a second set of lenses to ensure that this is actually taking place. But to speak to the specifics, I'm going to turn it over to AGM O'Connor.
Good afternoon, committee members. Jim O'Connor, your Assistant General Manager of Operations. To answer your question, Director Corbett, are we prioritizing it? Not specifically as a direction from management, but I can tell you that most of the staff are now purchasing electric equipment. As I've been going around the district, that's what I'm seeing is they're all getting, they really like the electric equipment, and it's now become effective. So they're using it. But I will bring this up with my management team and see what direction they're giving. But I can tell you staff are just finding that it's a much better piece of equipment in terms of its noise, its environmental impact. And I'm seeing more and more of it as I go around the district. So certainly staff are being responsive to that.
Thank you very much. That's really great news, AGM O'Connor. Thank you. And then I have just one last. Thank you for the funding for the butterfly garden. And I know in our previous discussions a year or two ago, we were speaking very directly about monarch habitat. So do we know, does that include monarch friendly plants that monarchs like, or is it just general butterfly, or are we emphasizing some monarch habitat somewhere?
Jim, are you able to respond to that for me?
The short answer is, Director Corbett, I will get back to you on the details of that project.
Great. Thank you so much. That's great. All right, I'm done. I left a few things for other people. Thank you.
Director Rosario.
Thank you. Just to follow up on Director Corbett's question on the helicopter, the replacement helicopter. I know we were lobbying both in DC and Sacramento for a bigger helicopter. So are we going to be funding the same size helicopter, or are we going to be going to a bigger one?
We, so Director Rosario, Deputy General Manager Alvarez, we are in the process of formulating a recommendation, and it really is based on the most critical needs for the district. There's several alternatives that we're exploring, and there's a helicopter oversight committee that will be discussing precisely that question that you just brought forward this week. So it is certainly our intent to make sure that we tool the district correctly. And so we'll get back to you once we formulate our recommendation.
Okay, great. And I'm very happy to see the hazardous tree removal fund to be robust. On the diversity, equity, inclusion training, is $100,000 enough to do what we want to do for this year?
So Director Rosario, the $100,000 allocation for mid-year speaks to the opportunity to bring aboard an IDEA consultant that will be able to conduct an assessment of the overall organization in multiple areas that may perhaps fold in the entire interest that were discussed at in the passing of the last resolution. And it's the beginning. That's the best way I can answer that. We will know more once we have our findings and recommendations.
Okay, great. Glad to see that on the budget. And I think, the vaults to sewer. Do we have? Is there a list of which restrooms we're going to be converting to sewer?
Go ahead, Jim.
We do have a specific list that our Chief of Mass, Kelly Barrington, has put together with Eric Bowman and Rodney Strong. So we do have a list. I don't have it in front of me, Director Rosario, but I can provide that to you. I know that we also have a fairly large project looking at the conversion, replacement of the restrooms along Crown Beach, which is another big project that will be funded through this money.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just wondering, 500,000 might not be enough.
Oh, no. Not nearly enough.
Okay. Great. And then just to comment on the hand dryers at Quarry Lakes. I don't know if you should probably look at some of the studies. They're saying that those hand dryers actually spread more bacteria and things than you think. I don't know. I would take a look at that and see if that's really what you want. So from what I've read, they spread more stuff around than they do anything else, especially in this COVID era. And I'm glad to see where the trail counters on the budget as well. The more we know about how many people and who's using our trails, the better. So thank you very much.
Is that it, Dee, for you?
That's it.
You know, I'd like to have a better understanding of what we're spending here. And I'm looking at the chart at the very end of the report. And when I add up general fund, other special revenue funds, and major infrastructure revenues and renovation and replacement funds, it ends up being a little north of 16 million. And then, not coincidentally, at first thought was that our fund balance this year that you just presented in the prior report is at 16.6. And ordinarily, I think we're just spending that. We're just allocating that those funds, because they weren't available before the audit confirmed that it existed. So we're now taking that fund, but we're not actually. There's only 13 million of that fund being used here. Is that sense I have of how I'm reading that correct? Okay. So there is some of the fund balance going elsewhere?
Well, Director Coffey, as Dr. Alvarez spoke in her opening remarks, we are leaving over 2.5 million for a smoothing fund. So we're not calling that out for future appropriations. We're not necessarily setting it aside in a specific reserve. We're just leaving it to remain in fund balance for, waiting to see how the economic response is going to be necessary for the district. So it can certainly assist with any shortfall of property tax revenue in this year. It can assist with the 2021 budget process of having extra funding available to smooth through this economic recession that we see on the horizon.
So the smoothing funds that she spoke of aren't reflected in here. That wasn't clear to me. They're not in here.
They're actually not called out in the report because we're just leaving it in fund balance. We could have probably done a better idea messaging of that, but we're just allowing that to remain unappropriated so that it can be available for this future need that we anticipate.
And in addition to that, it should be important to note that it was disclosed as part of the report in your agenda packet. Mm-hmm. So it is mentioned there with the intent to use the unallocated balance for a smoothing fund. It's part of the actual narrative on the staff report.
Okay, I guess I just missed that. Dee, you had another question?
Yeah, just to follow up on that. Would it be just as well to put that money in reserve and then it could be earning interest and then pull it out when we need it?
We can certainly, when we bring this item to the board, we can be clear in the resolution that we are setting this aside as a committed fund balance for the recession.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay.
I understand the need to allocate the fund balance. Why at this point are we allocating new expenditures from FF and the various assessment districts as opposed to having those allocations in the original budget?
So Measure FF, this is the first year we're getting 6 months worth of revenue. And so I guess we didn't put it in the adopted budget because we weren't getting money for the first 6 months. And we didn't want anybody to think that was available. But as of July, when they have their first levy, then, you know, we should get half of that $3.2 to $3.3 million. And so that's why we're appropriating funds for projects only, not for staffing, for this first half a year of Measure FF. That was our thinking with that. And assessment districts equally, we try to budget for 100% of the revenue coming in. And then if we, for some reason, find that we have a remaining fund balance, we're trying to utilize the lighting and landscaping district money for projects as well. So that's why you see a few projects on here for those areas.
Okay, then my last question / comment is that's more of a question again for you, Deborah. You had predicted or projected at an earlier, either at this committee or at a workshop, that we will see in all likelihood a deficit this year. You were projecting, I forget what the number was. It was somewhere between $5 and $10 million, meaning that we would indeed be dipping into reserves, existing reserves. And I understand then that the 2 million that Anna referred to could be considered as reserve against that projected deficit. And of course, then next year, we're projecting the probable deficits again. So respond to the temptation to say, why don't we use all of this that isn't directly defensive in terms of what we're doing? We're not allocating all of it to reserves. We're not allocating all of it to the immediate costs of the COVID-19 crisis. We're spending new money on some projects, and perhaps they're all high priority, and I was impressed by the list. But I'd just like to hear the response to, well, wouldn't the conservative thing here to do would be to use these funds, you know, other than FF. I mean, we have to spend FF funds, but the entirety of this fund balance and allocate it towards some grand reserve. You know, that I've just spoken to. Again, not that which we are funding for the renovations, for instance, infrastructure. I understand that. That's the equivalent to me of putting money into reserves, and the COVID expenditures and the added pension trust funds we're putting in here. But the rest of it, isn't there a temptation to reserve it?
Yeah, thank you, Director Coffey. I think as we put together our parameters for these mid-year requests, we had that similar conversation of do not, you know, think hard about what your requests are and why they're necessary. And so if you look back at it, I think a lot of the operational asks are for board priorities that we've already committed to, or in some cases, some of the equipment purchases are doing two things. They're helping with the IPM program and our weed abatement, and they're also providing an additional vehicle so people don't have to double up again. So a lot of them end up being a little bit COVID related to help our staff have more equipment available. And then other things are in some cases repairs. So we could certainly trim the list some, but I think there was a lot of thought put into what the requests were as we went forward. So Anna, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? She's the watchdog of this list as well.
Yes, and I appreciate the conversation that we're having here, Director Coffey, because we've had, as Deborah mentioned, ample conversations, her and I, and certainly with the GM and the executive team. And it should be noted that the fund balance from 2019, we already took from the top a percentage to be set aside for reserves. So the one-time allocation is by policy what traditionally has been made available to the district. So this is a second pass over the fund balance for 2019. So even within the second opportunity for one-time allocations, we're setting aside the balance of $2 million. That's on top of what we already took for the reserves. So it is a relatively conservative approach, because even the pieces that we're not setting aside for the reserves speak to most critical priorities. And Deborah mentioned it's not only the board's interest, but also the ability to correctly position the district to successfully meet the direction from the board. For instance, on the ban of the use of glyphosate. For instance, on our hazardous tree removal program, or perhaps on our ability to be able to advance very critical projects that were not anticipated, such as COVID, everything that we're doing with COVID and the diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's a mix, it's a hybrid, it's a little bit of something, but I can assure you, it is a very conservative approach. And we'll continue to do even more of that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I don't question any of these expenditures. They all struck me as falling into those categories you described, especially very high priority categories. I was just trying to reconcile the concept, not being a finance person, the concept of having a projected deficit and dipping into reserves to cover it, and not just simply allocating to cover that with this stuff. But I think I'm understanding what's going on and appreciate it. Any further questions, comments from board members? I know Ellen has to drop off, doesn't she? Or did she?
Oh, she's still here.
No, she's here.
Oh, before you drop off, I thought we should finish up and at least have the motion and the recommendation. Do you all want to put that recommendation back up, essentially to forward the proposed list of expenditures as mid-year adjustments to the full board?
Second.
There we go. So it's been moved and seconded. Please call the roll.
Holly Haynes, Committee Secretary, taking roll call vote. Director Corbett?
Aye.
Director Rosario?
Aye.
Director Coffey?
Aye. So it passes unanimously. I don't think, we already heard from Kelly. I don't think there's any other public comment on this matter. Is there? No, so we'll move on. Are we ready to move on to item 3, management? All right.
Yes.
The budget calendar presented by Deb Spalding.
Great. Am I sharing my screen yet? No, hang on. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you all see that? All right. So this item is walking you through our 2021 budget calendar. We just finished talking about the 2020 mid-year process. And we also talked about finishing up last fiscal year, 2019. So now we're going to be talking to you about what's going to be happening in preparation for 2021. And so this is just for your information to help you have some context, you know, especially as we're thinking about the critical issues and the financial situation that we are in right now and what we think might be coming in the future. So right now it's June, and you have just heard the 2020 mid-year budget requests. Something that's going to be going on behind the scenes also in June is position verification. So we look at all the current staff at the district, and we have the supervisors and managers review the list of who's working here now and what fund source they will be funded from in 2021. We always have a priority to ensure that we are able to maintain our existing staff. So that's a really critical step. And it happens behind the scenes, but just to give you the full story of what's going on. In July, the board will see the 2020 mid-year budget requests, and then divisions and departments will be talking about their 2020 performance measures. And as you may have heard or may have thought, a lot of our 2020 performance measures are going to be very different from what we had envisioned originally. So you'll be seeing that, I believe, in July. Then in August, we start preparing our preliminary base budget. And so at that point, we're looking at how much would it cost to continue operating the park district the way we do now with our base staffing, with everything that we currently have. And we start to receive our property tax revenue information. And so we're trying to see, what our costs are going to be next year and what our revenue is going to be next year, and if it's going to be enough. And that's when we have to look at our fund balances, and as we're thinking about what new things would we want to add, what new things do we need to add, we have a better sense of what's available. So in September, Finance and the GM's office, Deputy General Manager, review different requests from departments and performance measures from each department. And we think about what the priorities and needs are of the park district, and come up with a list of proposed budget requests to be presented to the board. And those are all in October, are added to our preliminary budget to create what we call the proposed budget. And the first time the Finance Committee sees that is at the end of October. And we just provide the general fund preview at that point, and just to give you a sense of where things are headed. In November, sometimes in October also, but predominantly in November, we do budget presentations for the field staff and at our administrative offices to make sure that the Park District staff are aware of what decisions are being made. A calculation that's done by the budget department that's not really no one pays too much attention to, because it's very easy for us to stay within that GAN limit, but that's calculated in November. And then at the end of November, the Park Advisory Committee and the Board Finance Committee get to review the full 2021 proposed budget document. And then finally in December, we have our first and second public hearings and the adoption of the 2021 operating project and program budget document and the formal approval of the GAN limit. Then in the beginning of 2021, we are collecting our final status of performance measures, and we get everything compiled into a paper document, which is then printed and presented to the board and to certain staff, and then it's updated on our website. So that was information only, but happy to take any questions.
Director Rosario? I'm good. So that was information only, no action. We can move on to item 4 is first quarter 2020 general fund and other governmental funds financial reports. Who's on board for that?
We're covering a big gamut today, aren't we? We're going from, January of 2019 all the way through to what is the next budget. So we're covering a lot of ground. We're going to have Michelle go ahead and present to you the first quarter results.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle.
Michelle, I think you have the wrong thing up on your screen.
Okay, let me just present. Sorry. Okay. Sorry, I'm just going to share my screen now. Here we are. Okay, so as Deborah mentioned, we are presenting the first quarter 2020 General Fund and Other Government Funds Financial Report. And again, I'm Michelle Strawson-O'Hara, Assistant Finance Officer. I'd like to start with an overview of the general fund revenue and expenditures for the first quarter of 2020. And you can see that the first column shows what we budgeted for the revenue and expenditures, and the second column shows the actual revenue and expenditures through March 30th, 2020. We'll drill down on these shortly, but you can see that the actual revenues were approximately $15 million, or 8.8% of budget, which was actually fairly consistent with the prior year. and actual expenditures were 38.7 million, which is approximately 22%. And this is expected at this point in the year. Okay, if we look at, okay, so if we look at the general fund revenue trends over the past 5 years, you can see that the blue line represents total revenues and the red line represents property taxes. And you'll see that the property taxes are the primary sources of revenue, represents approximately 90% of the budgeted revenue for the year. And then on the general fund expenditures chart, the salaries and benefits are the main component of total expenditures. They represent about 66% of budgeted expenditures for 2020. And then next, if you look at attachment B of your report, this shows the details of the general fund expenditures and revenue and expenditures by category and also by division. Where there are variances of over or under 10%, we've provided explanations at the bottom of the page. The most significant dollar variances in revenues, just pardon me here. So the most significant variances, again, are property taxes, but that is as expected for this point in the year, given that we receive our significant payments in the second and fourth quarter each year. And then transfers in are recorded at 100% since transfers are recorded immediately upon approval of the budget appropriation. And then the most significant variances in expenditures relate to unexpended supplies and services, which again are expected to increase as we move throughout the year. So next, we'll take a look at the audited general fund balance. We can see we have a beginning audited assigned fund balance of 71.3 million. Then when we add the projected revenue for 2020 of 171.1 million and subtract the budgeted expenditures of 173.8, we're left with an estimated ending fund balance at December 31st, 2020 of approximately 68.6 million. So the district does, as you know, have a reserve policy of 32% of annual revenue, which calculates out to 54.8 million. And this leaves us with an estimated excess of 13.8 million. Okay.
What we're appropriate, sorry, Michelle, which is exactly what we're recommending for the mid-year adjustments.
Yes, that's a very good point. Exactly. Yeah. So attachment C in your packet summarizes all the other funds, the special revenue funds, which include our lighting and landscaping districts and zones of benefits, and our project funds, which can vary significantly against budget due to the timing of project receipts. We also have our debt service funds and our internal service funds, which pay for the district-wide costs of workers' compensation, general liability insurance, major infrastructure and equipment, as well as employee benefit claims. So that concludes my presentation for the first quarter. Does anyone have any questions on that?
Deborah?
Thanks, Director Coffey. So I'm a very detailed person, and Michelle did a great presentation at a high level. The first quarter is always really hard because hardly any of our revenue has come in. But the chart that we put together for you that's on page 22, I just want to show you a little bit about how I review it. So here we are showing the budget to actual variance, which here, it says we're only at, just under, we're at 7.8% of our property tax budget for the first quarter, right? It's not 25%, like 25% of the year's gone by, but then you compare it to last year, and last year we were at 8.0%. So for the first quarter, there really wasn't a change. And, through the time that I've been here, I've been trying to tighten up that property tax budget, get it as tight as possible. So, as a as a speaker at the PAC mentioned, you know, why do you have a 3% variance? Well, I'm trying to get it tighter, but then you also don't want to over project. And then the second line on that is looking at charges for services, where that's the revenue we get in for recreation fees, facility rentals and such. And as of the first quarter, we were at 12.7% of our budget. The prior year, we were at 19%. And I think Michelle mentioned some of that's because we had to issue refunds. Mm-hmm. Even though we're not, you know, the second quarter is where we're going to really see a shortfall in that revenue source, but we were already issuing refunds before the end of March, and those are reflected there. So this is kind of the table that I like to look at a detailed level to see where we are as compared to where we were last year. And when we present the second quarter, it'll reveal even more. Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, I do not have any questions, Director Rosario.
I have none as well.
Seems very straightforward. Thank you. We do have the action requested before us, review reports and direct staff to prepare the information for acceptance by the Board of Directors. So I don't see Director Corbett. Let me confirm, she has not returned, has she? She went to the EOC meeting, Emergency Operations.
Correct.
All right, so it's just the two of us. So I'll make the motion.
Okay, I'll second.
And a roll call.
Allie Haynes, Committee Secretary, taking roll call vote. Director Rosario.
Aye.
Director Coffey.
Aye. So that motion passes. Next on the agenda is item 5, public comments. Do we have any further public comments at this point? No?
I don't believe anyone's requested to make a public comment.
No, we haven't received any public comments.
Thank you. And I don't believe we received any comments in writing or through voicemail either.
No.
Thank you. Just want to be careful and sure. So board comments in closing. Director Rosario.
Thank you again to staff for an incredible report, a lot of work, and my congratulations to our auditors as well. I think they're going to be good. Yeah, I think we're in good shape. I think if you look back at the last little depression we had in 2008, 9, just whatever, I think we did have a reserve fund, but I don't think we ever had to use it. And I'm hoping that's the case again. Yeah, I think we're in good hands. My only worry is if we're in such good shape that maybe the state will be looking at us at some point. But hey, we are where we are, and I thank everyone for their stewardship on our finances. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I agree with everything you said. You know, I think it goes to that question I was raising is, you know, is this the most conservative way we could use these funds? And I think the answer ultimately was we have already been doing a very good job at setting aside reserves. We have a fairly large reserve. So we're in good shape to fight this oncoming battle just from the prudent work we've done in the past financially. You know, beyond just the general reserves, all the pension reserve and other reserves that end up being indeed the fund balance we usually have. So we were in very good shape coming into this. And I think that's the answer to the question I raised. I too just want to close by suggesting that the tremendous amount of work that goes into this meeting is very apparent and very much appreciated. And thank you all. And also I want to thank Allie and Connie for all the work they put into getting this meeting actually functioning and taking place. So Ellen, before we adjourn, any closing comments?
No, I would just echo what you said. Thank you so much for all the work in putting all this together, but the continued work that the district does with all of your diligence to keep us in great financial shape. It is really amazing and wonderful. And I've had the opportunity to see different models, and we have a very good one. So thank you.
Deborah, you want to close it?
I did. I wanted to, thank you to the board for acknowledging staff. They have been working so hard through all of this. It's been quite interesting. And so we appreciate you acknowledging that. But I also wanted to acknowledge the board, because the reason we have these strong policies is because of the board of directors supporting them. So you all are the ones that have approved these financial policies that allow us to have these reserves and to act in this manner. So the recession takes a while to hit. It will be here in 2 years. So it's not that we can see it right now. It's going to happen, and it's going to take, 18 months for it to be reflected here at the district, but it will hit us. So.
Thank you. And we're just praying for better leadership at this point at the national level.
I did have one scheduling item, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, sure.
So originally in our work plan, we suggested that we might cancel the July meeting, and we have our next meeting after that scheduled for early August, August 5th. And so that's another reason I don't think we need 2 meetings right next to each other. So if the committee is okay with us canceling the July meeting, we will go ahead and do that. And that would take us to, what does it say on this schedule? August 5th would be the next Finance Committee meeting.
Okay.
Director Corbett.
I just have a question, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I know that we moved a board meeting in August, and I can't remember if we moved the first one or the second one, so that the board had an opportunity to actually take some summer time off because we don't get to plan ahead like you guys. So
our current calendar, our current calendar shows that we have a board meeting on the 4th of August, which is the first Tuesday.
Okay.
Canceled the second meeting.
So finance would be the next day.
Correct.
Yes. So that
meeting on
that's good. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure they weren't.
I'm okay with canceling July if you think it's a good idea, with the understanding that if things change, if issues arise, we're all available, especially by Zoom these days. So
yes,
please feel free to hold a meeting if you think it's needed.
Okay, thank you. We'll assess that, and we'll let you know whether we need that meeting or not.
All righty, so it's time to adjourn. Anything else? Yes, Ellen.
I was just saying I don't mind missing the July 2nd meeting because it gives everybody an opportunity to take a deep breath and a little breather, even though, obviously travel plans aren't what they normally are this time of year. We can celebrate 4th of July and some good time off for all of you hardworking folks that are keeping this place going.
Sounds good. Anna, anything?
Well, I didn't want to come after Deborah because she did such a beautiful job to acknowledge the board directors and staff. And I want to make sure that she has the space to have that conversation with you. But, it is difficult to be able to continue carrying on the business of the district while attending to the emergency response to COVID that keeps all of us very busy. And Deborah has been very much a thought partner to me and the general manager in much more than her role as the AGM of Finance, as we're responding to all these issues. And so while she's acknowledging staff, we should take the moment to acknowledge her.
Certainly.
Yes. Thank you, Deborah. Yes.
Thank you. It's
You're just amazing.
Absolutely. So with nothing further, not seeing any hands raised, we stand adjourned. Thank you again.
See